revs up so fast when you get on it. It's very little body roll and you get lots of grip. Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video we're gonna be doing a quick comparison between a Ford Focus RS and a Honda Civic Type R. But first and foremost, a huge shout out and thank you to the owner of the Civic Type R, Rob, for giving me some time with his car. I'm gonna include a link to both of his Instagrams in the description below. Go follow him. Let's get straight into the video. So let's quickly compare powertrains with both the cars. So under the hood of the Focus, we have a turbocharged 2.3 liter four-cylinder that goes through a 6-speed manual transmission. Power outputs are 350 horsepower and then 350 pound-feet of torque. Coming over to the Type R, we have a turbocharged 2-liter four-cylinder that also goes through a 6-speed manual. Power outputs are 306 horsepower and then 295 pound-feet of torque. This is front-wheel drive, and then this is all-wheel drive. Now, I mainly want this review to be about a driving comparison between both the cars, so let's quickly go over the exterior elements of both of the vehicles. Starting over here with the RS, notice that you've got these really nice lines here on the hood, and then coming down below, you do have an LED accent light right there with the projector bulbs. We have the RS logo and then the fog lights down below. And then just notice how aggressive this is compared to a regular Focus with all of the venting and then the front splitter down below. And yeah, it does look kind of crazy, but then you come over to the Type R, and the Type R is on a whole another level. You've got the venting there in the center of the hood. You've got the full LED lights, which look absolutely fantastic. And then notice all of the venting here on the front end looks super aggressive. And then you've got the carbon fiber print on top of the front splitter, which again looks really good. But yeah, I mean, this thing just looks crazy. It makes the RS look pretty pedestrian. Now, coming over to the tire and wheel setup, we have 19-inch wheels here on the RS. They're 235 millimeter in the width. And then over on the Type R, we've got 20-inch wheels, and then the tire width is 245 millimeter. So a little bit bigger wheel, a little bit wider tire here on the Type R. And again, front-wheel drive versus all-wheel drive. Now, the all-wheel drive system here on the RS will send pretty much 50-50 split. Unless you're in the drift mode, then it'll send 70% to the rear, but most of the time it's pretty much a 50-50 split. You do get some torque steer with this. The thing that's funny is, you guys will notice in the driving, there's a lot less torque steer with the Type R compared to the RS, which is, it's kind of interesting. And then they both have Brembo brakes here for the front set. You guys can see here on the Type R what that looks like. And then on the RS, I love how you have the blue versus the red. And then you've got the carbon fiber print in the side skirts. I guess we have no side skirts on the RS. And then just look here, kind of like how everything bulges out in both of them, but obviously the Civic is a lot crazier. And then popping here to the back, we do have wings on both of them. We have the little wing, and then we have the massive wing over here on the Type R, just on a whole nother level. And then I forgot to mention, you do have the red Honda badges. This does come with normal Ford logos, but I blacked them out because, well, it looks a whole lot better. Now, from an exhaust tip game perspective, which actually we'll probably need to get a little bit closer so you guys can see these, I think they look pretty cool here on the RS with the 2 exhaust tips and then the diffuser. But coming over here to the Type R, you can see the diffuser's a little bit more aggressive, and you've got the 3 tips in the center, which I think looks a whole lot better. Now, this venting here in the back, I am not a fan of. They did fix it on the 2020s and the 2021s, I believe. They made it look a little bit better. But yeah, on the 17s, 18s, and 19s, yeah, it just doesn't look as good. Taillights look pretty good. I mean, both of them, I'm not a fan of either set of taillights, but both of them look pretty okay. And yeah, so that is the Type R, and that is the RS for the exterior. Now that we've gone over the exterior, let's quickly pop into the interiors of both of them. We'll start over here with the RS, and we'll kind of just open everything up so you guys can see. And by the way, my car was originally white. It probably would have been better to do this comparison while my car was still white before I wrapped it. But notice that we've got the blue accenting here on the leather here. And then I've got an RS1. So that means is you have partial leather with cloth inserts instead of the Alcantara like what you get in the RS2. But notice all the blue stitching here on the back seats. And then coming over to the front seating area, here's kind of a look at the cockpit. Notice you've got these nice bucket seats. Again, RS logo. They are Recaro seats. You can see the whole shape of them. Manually adjustable. And then there's kind of a look at the pedals down below. And again, the whole steering wheel setup. I'll talk about the drive mode select when we are driving it, and then also how the shifter actually feels and all that kind of stuff. This is just to briefly show you guys the difference with the interiors. We'll close that up, pop over to the Civic, which one thing I want to mention is the doors feel a lot nicer on the Civic. Like, The doors on the RS feel heavier and kind of, I don't know, it feels older. This feels way more modern, if that makes sense. But notice we've got the red stitching here, a bunch of cloth trim, and then here are the seats in the back. So notice the theme with this is all red, whereas with the RS it's all blue in terms of the interior. And then coming over here to the front, you guys can kind of see the door panel right here. And then this is where we do get the Alcantara, which is nice, and the carbon fiber. And then here are the bucket seats. Now, some people say they aren't a huge fan of these. I think they look really good. They're definitely more comfortable than the RS. And the seating position you get is a lot better. They are manually adjustable still. Pedals definitely look a lot nicer. That is not arguing. And then here's the interior. I feel like the interior here definitely looks nicer. And again, we'll talk about the shifter, the drive modes, all that kind of stuff when we're driving it. But there's just a quick look at the interior. Now, before we take it out and drive it, let's quickly talk about pricing. So these are both 2017s, and right now the market value on both of them is pretty similar for cars with similar amounts of mileage. You're going to be in the low to mid 30s depending on mileage and condition, all that on either one of these. And so yeah, from a pricing perspective, they're pretty much the same, but let's take them out and drive them. So let's talk about the visibility and then kind of a little bit more about the interior before we set off here in the Type R. So visibility is really good. It's easy to see out of the hood, through both of the mirrors, all throughout the rear. Even though it has that gigantic wing, which gets in the way a little bit, it's actually not bad whatsoever. It doesn't impede the visibility too much. So visibility is great in the car. And then they're actually pretty similar from a daily driver perspective. They both have like the hill assist, where if you're on a hill, the whole rollback thing, both of them have that on it. And then obviously they both have dual zone climate with them, and neither of them have heated seats. They both have different drive modes, right, that are more or less sporty, right? You've got kind of like your comfort mode, and then you have like this one, you have a sport mode, and then you have the Type R, you have the R Plus mode, which is kind of like your track driving mode, and that does give you auto rev match, whereas the Focus doesn't have that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, from like the daily driver perspective, and they're pretty much the same. Like this one also, my Focus is up, that's why I did that. This one also has a backup camera, just like the Focus. Like it's all very similar from that perspective. But let's drive it now and talk about how they're different. Oh, again, we're starting off here in the Type R, and we're in the R Plus mode. Man, it just wants to rip off those front tires. That is so funny with how it does that. I can definitely feel the power difference between both the cars. And this one has the auto rev match, so I kind of have to drive a little bit differently. So this one has the auto rev match, and so obviously I have to get used to that and kind of not rev match it myself. But the one thing that I will say is it's a very seamless system, and as long as you're smooth with the clutch, it does a really good job. The shifter in this is amazing. It's super notchy. It just goes right in, and you can feel that you're in the gear perfectly every single time. Like there's no problem with that whatsoever. That's definitely a huge highlight of the Type R, and it's actually very smooth as well from a suspension standpoint. I'd say that, obviously I'll talk about this more when we drive the Focus, but I feel like this is smoother, even though this is in the R, obviously the Plus R mode. I feel like it's smoother on road than the Focus, even in its softest setting, which is definitely amazing. And I guess that it makes this a little bit more daily drivable compared to the Focus. Look at the rev match. It's just definitely cool. The power band feels more linear in this compared to the RS. It definitely feels like it doesn't feel as boosty, I guess. Whereas the RS is kind of like nothing happens, and then the turbos hit, and then it's like, wow. Whereas with this car, it's just kind of pulls all the way through. It feels more like a naturally aspirated engine, even though it is turbocharged. So I kind of went up this little road here because then we'll be able to get some handling with the Type R, and then we'll take the RS up here as well. But this obviously will, again, definitely test out kind of the handling and braking capabilities of both of the cars. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and it just, I mean, it's a little bit rough with the blipping, but it's it feels kind of like someone who's not the best at driving a manual transmission when it blips. And I feel like that's just because it's a small 2-liter 4-cylinder, and they aren't really fond of blipping and all that kind of stuff. They kind of they just don't really like to do that. Thank you for letting me buy a truck, driver. Handling is great. I love the steering feel. You actually get feel through the steering wheel with this. Yeah, definitely feels great. You get tons of grip too, actually, with the car. Body roll is pretty much non-existent. Again, definitely a little bit rougher in this R plus mode, or plus R, whatever. They have it backwards. It sounds kind of weird, but it's not bad by any means. It revs up so fast when you get on it. It's definitely exciting with how fast that revs up once you actually do get on the throttle a little bit. So that's definitely a cool characteristic here with the Type R. And there's police everywhere. It's like we can't get some fun driving in for today's video. I love the shifter. I think that's definitely the high point, is the feeling of the shifter, and then also the steering feel you get here with the Type R. It's definitely, I mean, again, we'll talk about this more in the Focus. It definitely feels better. Like, Honda definitely builds a better manual transmission than Ford. Yeah, it grips like crazy, and it doesn't really feel like, you feel like you're pulling through the corners with this, but it doesn't feel front wheel drive. You don't get any torque steer. It just feels like it's just pulling through the corners, but there's no, like I said, there's no torque steer with it. So it definitely lends to an exciting driving experience, and it's actually really good because of that. But let's get into selling things up here with the Type R for this review, at least. So first off, exterior wise, I definitely love how it looks. I love the crazy aesthetics, all that kind of stuff. Interior wise, I think it's definitely nicer than the RS objectively. And then from a driving perspective, it drives really nice. It doesn't feel as quick. It definitely feels like it's a slower car, but not by much, but it doesn't feel as quick. The power band feels more linear. It doesn't feel as boosty as the Focus, and we'll talk about that more when we actually drive the Focus. Other than the power band and all that, again, the shifter is amazing with this car. Like, just, it's perfect. And the auto rev match is pretty good. It's not necessarily the smoothest system, but the auto rev match is relatively good. I love how fast the engine revs up. I love the grip that you get. I love the steering feel. Definitely a driver's car. And I mean, if I pop it over into the sport mode, right, still does the auto rev match for me. Everything kind of softens up a little bit. Very daily drivable. Like, you could definitely daily drive this in a ton of comfort. It'd be a ton of fun as well to daily drive. But overall, really solid package. And now it'll be interesting to see how this compares to the RS. Well, let's talk about visibility and the drive modes and all that with the RS. So you can see visibility of the hood, definitely good. There's through both of the mirrors, and then here's through the rest of the rear. Not as good as the Civic in terms of the seating position and all that, but it's still pretty good. And then in terms of the drive modes, you have quite a few drive modes. Again, pretty similar setup, right? You have your normal, sport, track, and then this one has the drift mode as well. So you have your daily driver mode, you've got your fun driving mode, and then you have the track driving mode as well. In terms of the clutch feel, I think this is a little bit heavier, and then the shifter doesn't feel nearly as notchy, and we'll kind of talk about that more when we drive it. It actually has an actual hand brake versus the other one has an electronic brake, which is kind of interesting. But the mode that I drive my Focus RS all the time is sport mode, and then I hold the traction control button for about 10, well, not 10 seconds. Yeah, it's about 10 seconds. And then it turns all of the computers off. I feel like that's the best driving mode, whereas with the Type R, I feel like the Plus R mode is definitely the most fun to drive that one in. But we'll set off now. Let's start off with the Focus RS. So, it doesn't rev up as fast as the Honda, but the car does feel quicker. And I mean, the power figure suggests that, but this car does way more than the Type R. So the Type R weighs about 3,100 pounds, and then the RS here weighs about 3,400 pounds. And sorry if I kind of mixed things up there. I feel like I said the wrong thing for a second there. But yeah, this one has more power, feels a little bit faster, but doesn't rev up as quick. And then as for the shifter, it's okay, but it doesn't feel nearly as good. Like the Honda shifter feels just so notchy, just perfect into every single gear. Whereas this, there's a little bit of vagueness, and it's just not nearly as razor sharp. It just doesn't feel as well put together. But the one thing I will say, again, this doesn't have the auto rev match, so you have to do it yourself. This engine is significantly more blippable than the Civic Type R. Like the Civic Type R, when you have the auto rev match on, even with that on where it's, you know, puts it in the perfect amount of RPMs, it's still kind of rough. Whereas this, it's very smooth, and this does have unequal length headers, just like a Subaru STI. And so I think that's a big part in terms of like the blippability with this, why it rev matches just so perfectly, and it's smooth when you actually hit the RPMs right and everything. So there is that difference as well. The other thing that's interesting is that one will roast the front tires. This one doesn't do that so much, but you definitely do get some torque steer when you go full throttle with the RS. Whereas with the Type R, it's, even though it's front wheel drive, it doesn't really torque steer. It just, you'll get the spinning, but you don't get the pull on the steering wheel. So it's interesting that the front wheel drive car has less torque steer than the all wheel drive car. Definitely definitely weird. So let's continue along here with the Ford Focus RS. And the other thing I need to talk about is the sound. This definitely sounds significantly better than the Civic Type R. There's really no arguing it. And I know that might upset some people, but the fact that you get, let me see if I can get to pop. Yeah, the fact that you get the pops out of the exhaust and just the intake noise as well. Again, it kind of sounds like in between a Subaru and just a regular inline four-cylinder, so it just has a little bit more character to it versus the Civic. It just sounds like any other four-banger. Like, it doesn't really, you've got some mechanical sound with it, but it's just not the same. Yeah, and this just, when you rev match downshift and it makes those pops, it's just so cool, the sound of it. Definitely just like the Honda, very little body roll. The thing that's interesting is this has a very trick all-wheel drive system that's constantly sending torque to different parts of the car, and it definitely makes it corner a little bit different. But I mean, it kind of leads to the same conclusion where both of them, very little body roll, and you get lots of grip. Even though the Civic has tires that are 10 millimeters wider, you don't really notice that difference in terms of corner grip or anything like that. They both feel relatively similar. This one, I will say, definitely pushes out of corners harder. The Civic, like I said, you definitely do feel that it pulls out of the corner, whereas the Focus RS, it kind of just has this shove that actually gives me a little bit more confidence. Like, I feel like I get better rotation with this car, so it makes it more exciting in a sense, but it also kind of makes it more confidence inspiring is another way to put it. Yeah, the blippability of this is crazy, the difference. And I mean, the biggest difference would be if you compared like the Civic Type R to an STI, because the STI is definitely the most blippable throttle wise. You compare those two and like the Civic would just not even hold a candle. Yeah, the other thing is, like with the Civic, I feel like I have to rev it all the way out to get all the power, whereas this, I don't feel like I have to do that. I feel like I can just kind of partially go through and then I get tons of power. So there is that difference. Yeah, the sounds this makes. Now, in terms of the steering, this is just as direct as the Civic, but you don't get as much feedback through the steering. So you don't know as much with what the front end's doing. This car, you kind of drive based on the chassis, whereas the Civic, you drive more based on the steering in terms of the feel. And so I mean, you kind of come to the same conclusion, right, in terms of your speed and in terms of your ability with the car, just through different ways of feeling. Like this, you're feeling what the whole car is doing around you. The Civic, to an extent, but it's mostly, you're kind of getting what's coming through the steering wheel. And so we must come to a conclusion. Which one is the better car? Which one just all around? And so let's start off with the exterior aesthetics. This is definitely, I mean, again, more pedestrian compared to the Civic in terms of the looks. This looks good, but the Civic definitely, I think, looks better. So exterior styling, Civic wins. Interior. This interior is pretty cool. The seats are very nice, but again, the Civic wins with the interior. Just the touch points feel nicer. Everything looks nicer. It feels more race car-like in that, whereas this feels like an economy car with some bucket seats thrown into it. It just doesn't feel as special as the Civic. They definitely nailed the interior with the Civic. But that's obviously just looks. Driving-wise, this is faster, so it wins there. Cornering abilities. They're both pretty similar, but this one I feel more confident in. Now, part of that might be due to the fact that I own this car, but again, the Civic is lighter weight. It gets just as good grip, and I just don't feel as much confidence coming out of corners with that, but it's still really good. Shifter feel, Civic definitely wins. Steering feel, they're both about the same in terms of directness, but the Civic, you get a little bit more feeling through the steering. So I guess the Civic wins on that front. From a braking perspective, they're both very similar. I'm going to put them as a tie in terms of the braking. And then aside from that, with the rest of the driving dynamics, the handling and the fun factor, it's kind of a mixed bag, right? You have more fun going through the gears with the Civic and just kind of like driving around. Like, you don't have to drive at the limit, and you can still kind of have fun with that. This, you don't have to drive at the limit either, because, right, you rev it up a little bit, you get some pops out of the exhaust, it's fun. But I mean, obviously I've got to kind of pick which one just overall is a little bit more exciting to drive. And I think I'm going to say the Focus. The Civic's a little bit more daily drivable. It's a little bit more comfortable in the suspension, not as much like rattling and all that kind of stuff, because again, the suspension system just feels way better on that. That being said though, I mean, as soon as you get on the back road, this is more exciting. Like, there's more that comes out with this car. Like, it just has more character. And so I guess I feel like this is more fun, but the Civic is a little bit more well-rounded. Then this has all-wheel drive, so it's going to do better in a winter climate. So it really, I mean, it's really a toss-up. This is definitely, like, this is one of the closest comparisons I've ever done. And so, I mean, honestly, you really have to drive both of them. But I guess I'll finish with, again, this would be a better weekend car that you could daily drive, whereas the Civic Type R would be a better daily driver that you could also use as a weekend car. Yeah, that's gonna sum things up for our comparison video between this Ford Focus RS and this Honda Civic Type R. And again, a huge shout out and thank you to the owner of the Civic Type R, Rob, for giving me some time with his car. Again, I'll put links to both of his Instagrams in the description down below. I'll see all of you guys in that next